Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the latest live stream from the Angry Astronaut. And I hope everyone is well, especially to my viewers in the Americas, as this is extremely early, especially for folks on the West Coast. So I see we have a fair number of people tuned in. Thank you very much for doing that. And hello. So this time I've chosen the topic just because I think it's a topic that's been neglected. And I also feel that the folks on the other side of the globe have been neglected as well. So I wanted to include folks in the other hemisphere just to see whether or not we might get some interest from over there. And because there has been interest expressed, especially from our supporters down under. Hi, guys, everybody in Australia, New Zealand, Tasmania, wherever. Very glad to have you on board. So first of all, just want to make sure, can everyone hear me? Just go ahead and type into the questions and answers portion of Patreon. Okay, excellent. Excellent. So our topic today, in case you didn't read the title, is Spaceport Darwin. Because as most of us know, or a lot of us know, I think, the closer you are to the equator, the easier it becomes to launch from planet Earth. The Earth spins more rapidly the closer you are to the equator, and so therefore you get a bit of a boost when you launch from there. So, and that boost goes anywhere from about 10 to 20% of an advantage versus launching from Cape Canaveral. So, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you consider that rockets use such a massive percentage of their fuel just to achieve orbit, any sort of boost that you can get from your launch position on Earth would make a massive difference. And yet, there are precious few places on planet Earth where launching from close to the equator is logistically possible. But one of these locations is Darwin, and Darwin does have a clear advantage over Cape Canaveral in terms of its location, but there are others as well. And I would like to talk about these and, talk about the positives and negatives, that sort of thing. So, hello, Machine Code from Sydney. Hi there. Thanks very much for tuning in, and very glad that I've been able to make this work for you folks. So, in any event, it looks like another space nut is removing a wall in his outbuilding. Wow, that looks like a hell of a job there. I don't envy you at all. Sorry to say things like that, but I just don't. So, in any event, best of luck to you there. That being the case, let's talk a little bit about the advantages, first of all, that Darwin would represent. Obviously, it's developed. I have no idea what its population is now. It's always been a more lightly populated city than many other cities in Australia, such as Perth or Sydney, obviously. That sort of thing. But nevertheless, I'm curious, folks in Australia, what is Darwin like? How many people are there? Just out of curiosity. Anybody who wants to contribute there? Because frankly, I don't know how many people are there compared to the old days. And it's something I could always look up, but I'd prefer to ask the experts. While I'm waiting, the one thing that I am familiar with is that Darwin was virtually flattened by a typhoon decades ago. It was quite a disaster with substantial loss of life. Somebody could count that as a negative for Darwin. But at the same time, Cape Canaveral is obviously, very vulnerable to hurricanes. So, really it's six of one and half a dozen of the other. So I don't think that, the danger of typhoons necessarily makes Darwin a bad candidate. 130,000 people is what I've been told. So, yeah, definitely, it's definitely a major city. I mean, with 130,000 people, I mean, yeah, it's not much compared to, say, New York or even Denver, where I'm from, that sort of thing. But nevertheless, it's a very yeah, very tropical, high humidity. Yeah, I'm familiar with that. I'm also curious as to what Australians think about the current political situation in Southeast Asia. Do any of you folks currently feel threatened by China? And for anybody watching from China, I apologize. I just know that things are getting tense in Southeast Asia and the China Sea. Australia was bombed in the Second World War by the Japanese. A lot of people don't know that. But the Japanese were able to bomb Australia. So, Australia is definitely within striking distance from major military powers in the area, and things are getting pretty tense. And as a matter of fact, from recent news that I read about, I heard that Australia complained about something that China was doing and then was suddenly subjected to a massive cyber attack. I don't know if that's from China, that is. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if that's hearsay. But I'm just curious as to whether or not any of that is true, and if you guys are feeling in any way concerned about any of that. Because it's just something that I heard, and I have no idea if it's true or not, or if it's something that even concerns you folks. I do know that obviously tensions are increasing between the United States and China over Taiwan and over the South China Sea, and I'm just curious if there's any worry as to whether or not Australia might get drug into that conflict. So in any event, we got one person typing right now in a response to that, and maybe my questions are a little too specific here towards Australia. But in any event, I am actually interested in knowing this because it would impact anything that we're be doing. Machine Code says we're being bought out by China. Well, heck, yeah, it could, if it's an economic conflict, well, clearly the Chinese don't want a whole lot of competition in space in general. They're doing their best to compete in space currently. Um, and, once again, I don't want to paint the Chinese as being 100% the bad guys here. It's possible that, their ambitions are not as nasty as we're thinking. But nevertheless, we have a response from Cyclonics. South China Sea occupation by China is a concern, affecting Southeast Asia a whole lot more than Australia. And good morning, nice Bryce. So in any event, yeah. So hopefully, yeah, it's the Chinese Communist Party, as Machine Code says. Yes, I agree. They are the problem. The Chinese people are not the problem. The Chinese government is obviously the problem. So in any event, we'll see how that goes. Okay, so it doesn't sound like Australians are terribly concerned about any sort of potential threat that China would represent to them. Any threat that China would represent to Australia, the United States would also probably get caught up. Another comment is made by Cyclonic saying Australia is stuck between relations with China and the United States. Hasn't that always been the case, by the way? For you guys, it's like well, in Vietnam, Vietnam conflict, you guys were wise enough to stay out of that. But in any event, yeah, it does seem to be the case that Australia, for the most part, tries to stay out of these situations that develop between the U.S. and whoever we decide to attack or whoever we decide to go to war with. It just seems to happen, on a regular basis. But we're getting off topic here and we're getting really political, so we'll try to venture away from that. Um, all the way with LBJ. How about that? Well, I wouldn't know. I wasn't around when LBJ was president. And Australia will always choose the United States, as Australia's prime ministers have said. Yes, well, that's obviously true. The Australia has been a traditional ally of the United States, and when the chips are down, Australia will support the United States. But when I say when the chips are down, I'm saying when things are an actual threat. Australia sent snipers to Vietnam. Thank you for contributing that going ballistic. I appreciate that. I don't know what sort of casualties Australia took in Vietnam. I certainly, I hate again to bring politics into this, but I certainly hope that it wasn't much because it was just a lost cause. And I think most folks agree with me on that, but not all. Obviously, I don't want to get too political about Vietnam here, and it's not the topic. So in any event, we'll go ahead and drift away from that. And in any event, and go towards Darwin. It sounds like Darwin would be a good spot. Port facilities, does it have that sort of thing? I assume it probably does, as far as that's concerned. Everything that would be necessary for SpaceX to move their facilities or set up a new facility, a new launch facility in Darwin. Does Darwin have those kinds of facilities currently set up? I believe that they do. So, I don't think that there would be any difficulties as far as that's concerned. So, really, are there any barriers to doing this sort of thing? Darwin or Cape York, says Machine Code, would be the choices. Um, Okay. Past week was actually Science Week in Australia, says Paroxys. Thank you. I'm not sure if I've seen you on this forum before. I didn't pay attention, but welcome if that indeed is the case. I didn't pay attention much, but I heard there was some focus on trying to make the radiation in space more livable, since it's one of the examples of aware that is useful both in space and on land. Well, certainly, Australia has a strong interest in science and in space, as just about any country does. Certainly, any developed country, and Australia has a very good education system and all that. So I am, certainly some very talented scientists, engineers, etc. Nice Bryce says getting building supplies there and production facilities would be my only concern. Cyclonic says Port Darwin is owned by China. Oh dear. That's unfortunate if indeed they have invested that heavily in that area. Well, I can say unfortunate, but at the same time, the Chinese do want to make money like anybody else. But at the same time, would there then be security concerns to SpaceX? I have no idea as far as that's concerned. They do have the port facilities. Darwin may have a disadvantage if the facility requires access to natural gas. Interesting. I have no idea if that's something that would be necessarily required. It's obviously Elon Musk is very big on solar power, as we all know. Australia receives a lot of solar energy, and has power in a lot of other respects as well. So I think that Elon Musk would probably have a pretty easy time providing whatever power was necessary. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of alternatives to natural gas. Obviously, electricity can be much more expensive depending on the circumstances. But at the same time, it depends on what you're using the natural gas for. But really, obviously what's needed is fuel and electricity and building materials, that sort of thing. But when it comes right down to it, Elon Musk is going to have to build a new launch facility somewhere using Cape Canaveral and the other facilities that are currently at his disposal is simply not practical if he intends to make use of the Starship. The Starship is going to have to launch so much in order to do what it needs to do. If we're talking 6 refuelings in orbit, having access to multiple launch sites would probably be a pretty good idea. Um, if absolutely, if we're talking about refueling a half a dozen times or perhaps even more, we're just going to have more launch facilities in general in order to accomplish everything that we're planning to do, not only in low Earth orbit, but also in CIS lunar space, and elsewhere. Okay, most reserves of natural gas are in Queensland. It would be north of Cairns. Interesting. So yeah, machine code seems to know quite a bit about Darwin. That's a good thing. An ongoing concern. There is a recent announcement that the U.S. is creating an oil storage facility or some. This is Paroxysant talking, or something in Darwin, presumably to assist the refueling of navies in the South China Sea. And there's expected fallout and changing of supply chains due to China, Hong Kong, etc. Once again, very, very tough stuff. And Wormhole Alien just brought up a topic that I was hoping would be brought up soon, which is why not Africa? So, in any event, yeah. So, why not Africa? Well, the obvious reasons is we need to find a country in Africa that's close to the equator, because South Africa is, probably one of the most modern nations in Africa, and yet it's a long ways away from the equator, just way south of it. So really no better as far as that's concerned. Kenya has a fair amount of problem with terrorism. And so in any event, just about any African country that's extremely close to the equator also suffers from a fair amount of issues with terrorist activity. Countries that have traditionally been very safe and lovely places. I've talked to a number of people who lived in Kenya back in the 50s and 60s, and it was a fantastic country back then. Kids could ride safely on the bus and things like that. It was really no problem whatsoever. But in any event, political stability of countries in Africa, there is some concern about that. Now, can anybody bring up any countries in Africa that are close to the equator to where that isn't the case? I'd be very interested to hear if there are any suggestions there, because frankly, I mean, even though like Kenya, for example, is a relatively safe. Obviously, well, we got Somalia, which is an awful place for anybody who's talked to anyone from there. Somalia is in complete chaos. Uganda and the Congo, once again, nations that have a history of instability. I don't know about recent history, But it's in terms Uganda and the Congo do have a fairly recent history of political instability. Gabon and Tanzania, interesting. I don't know if either of those countries are suffering from the same kinds of problems. Machine Code brought up that the U.S. does have an interest in the Northern Territory south of Darwin in the Pine Gap facility. Interesting. Okay. Tyre Anasazi, greetings from Australia. I am an ADF member. Well, hello and greetings. Thank you for showing up. I appreciate you participating in this. And by the way, we have 213 people dialed in. I am frankly a little shocked and very pleased. We didn't have near this many people dialed in the last time I did it during this particular time frame. So I'm very, very happy about this. Thank you for this audience tuning in. I don't know about safe countries, but there's a bunch of investment both by tech companies and solar facilities to build some infrastructure in Africa. Gavin is on the West Coast, so not a candidate. Yes, that's true. Anything on the, well, once again, we do launch things from California here, but nevertheless, it's not a perfect candidate. Yeah, it's got its issues. The East Coast is better than the West Coast. We do have a large U.S. military presence in far north Queensland, U.S. Marines mostly, but also the United States Navy and U.S. Air Force. Yes, Australia does have a lot of American military presence, and so many countries around the world can say the same thing. The United States military is pretty much everywhere. Our global presence as the sole remaining superpower, although other countries are competing with us on that, is tremendous. So, in any event, and that, of course, also means that wherever there's U.S. troops, if a large-scale conflict breaks out between the United States and someplace else, then that country becomes a target. Papua New Guinea has a strong history with Australia and the large port of Port Moresby, yes, which has quite a history during the Second World War. The Japanese made a hell of an attempt to attack and take over Port Moresby during that war. They were unsuccessful in doing so. But nevertheless, yeah, Port Moresby does indeed sound like an interesting possibility. Obviously, New Guinea does have some economic issues, but it may not have the same kinds of political instabilities that a lot of other countries in Africa might have, or terrorist issues. I think that that's a very interesting idea. And yeah, the West Coast is for polar orbits, says Going Ballistic. Yeah, that's true. So the West Coast can be used. It has to be used for different kinds of launches. Would Mexico make any sense? Says Nice Bryce. Well, you know what? It's hard to say. Mexico right now is going through a massive crisis with drug cartels. There's an enormous amount of corruption in that country at the governmental level, law enforcement level. A lot of kidnappings take place in Mexico. But once again, most of that activity is restricted to the border area, right along the border between the United States and Mexico. Not quite so much for everything else. And Mexico does have a history of being able to keep areas secure if it represents an economic advantage for them. The tourist spots, which I've been to one or two of them,
in my time, although not a lot, to be honest. I've been to the UK far more times than I've been to Mexico, interestingly enough. But yeah, they have the ability to keep areas secure as long as there's money in it. Drug cartels are in it for the money, so they can certainly be bought off. And I hate to put it that way, but the Mexican government might find themselves doing that in order to make sure everybody stays safe and secure in a facility like that. So yeah, Mexico is a possibility. It's just they are really going through a serious problem, a serious crime wave, and that's why a lot of people are fleeing that country. They're not fleeing because they're trying to grab American jobs, and I'm getting really political here, but they're not doing that. They're doing that to get away from chaos and violence in their country. And frankly, if my family was there, I'd be trying to run away too. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay, this is a highly charged issue in this country, but nevertheless, yeah, maybe so. And if Mexico had something going on that was, helping out their economy, maybe that would encourage, the Mexican population to stay put. Who knows? It might be a good thing. PNG is unstable, too close to Indonesia. So Papua New Guinea is unstable, apparently. Okay. Too close to Indonesia. Yeah, that's true. Indonesia, of course, does have its own terrorist activities, as many people know. And once again, this is no kind of slam on Islam as a religion or anything along those lines. But Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country on the planet. And so, therefore, there is a small percentage of their population that is involved in the extremist side of things. And so, therefore, could potentially represent a threat. And as I guess Papua New Guinea is unstable, that's unfortunate to hear. I'm sorry to hear that. It's been the case for a long time there. I was hoping maybe things have changed a bit. Boca Chica says Tyre Anasazi is a stone's throw from the Mexican border. That is absolutely true and a strong argument for putting a facility in Mexico, because all of the problems that I just talked about with cartels and everything like that is right there. It's right across the border, and yet nothing's happened. So if they can keep Boca Chica safe, then they could probably keep a Mexican facility safe. That's a very, very good point. So yeah, that strengthens the argument for a Mexican space facility. And really, Mexico's been struggling with their economy for a very long time, even though they are $1 trillion economy. Still, there definitely could be some huge advantages to Mexico to building a space facility there, and they're really close to the equator. So there's definitely a strong argument there. Could SpaceX share French Guiana with the European Space Agency? The only potential problem I could see there is with the companies that already currently make use of that facility to a great degree. I'm not going to name names right now, but in any event, there are certain companies that would have a great deal of issue with SpaceX simply because of the strong level of competition that exists. I don't know if that would influence sharing French Guiana with the European Space Agency or not. But nevertheless, that is a possibility. But once again, sharing something with the ESA could have some issues. Hard to say. Equatorial Guinea. Very interesting. Ali D. That's again another spot. Once again, I don't know a lot about the stability of the area. Tyre Anasazi points out that most of the violence in Mexico is on the west coast. Quintana Roo in the Yucatan would be ideal. Great food and beaches. Well, hey, there you go. That would be a very intriguing spot. Mexico is already starting to seem interesting. Cyclonics just pointed out drug trafficking on starships. Well, you know what? I mean, drugs have found their way just about any place else. And if you're talking about a colony of 1 million people, who knows? Who knows what might eventually happen? Pine Gap is the most commonly used name for a U.S. satellite surveillance base and Australian Earth Center. That might be a positive for Darwin being quite close, says Machine Code. Back to Darwin, yes. Another strong argument in their favor. Delivery in less than 30 minutes. Why not Puerto Rico? Says Going Ballistic. Yeah, that I think there's a very good argument to be made for that. Obviously, recently we had a hurricane that caused great devastation in Puerto Rico. That would create a lot of concern, not necessarily concern that would be backed up by any reality, because Cape Canaveral, once again, is also vulnerable to hurricanes. So, if we're willing to take the risk in Florida, on the Florida coast, why are we not willing to take the risk in Puerto Rico? And it is closer. So that would certainly be a possibility. A U.S. protectorate. So that's, as its pluses and negatives. But in any event, a fun thing about Darwin, says Paroxys, is it has a large indigenous community which does have a history of stargazing. Personally, I love to see culture infused into things like a space project. Yeah, that's intriguing. I didn't actually know that. And that's a hell of a thing. Why not? Why not, get a new culture that has a history of stargazing, but no history of space travel involved in the whole thing? I mean, I think that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. And once again, that applies, to Mexico. That doesn't, certainly there are plenty of people in Mexico that are interested in space. Launch platforms at sea seem feasible. That's something that was brought up. Yeah, and that is kind of one thing that I also wanted to talk, briefly about. Do we want to set up launch platforms instead of another launch facility, on land? Is that the way that we want to go? Is that an artificial way of us getting closer to the equator, just going that route? There are obviously positives and negatives to that. But obviously, SpaceX is already discussing doing this. Okay, in Darwin, back to Darwin, SpaceX has access to Australian aerospace engineers who are world class. They are indeed. Darwin is also well connected to Australia and the rest of the world, says Tyre Anasazi. Yes, once again, the argument for Darwin seems to be very strong. And why not? Why not bring our space agencies and our initiatives for going into the solar system and exploring the solar system into the southern hemisphere? Because it just isn't. And, why? Why are we doing that? With the exception, of course, of New Zealand. But of course, that's all unmanned rockets currently. But still, there's a total lack of it, and I think that should change. So there's definitely a possibility there. We have a couple more people typing. So yeah, once again, pluses and minuses of launch facilities on platforms like oil platforms, that sort of thing, as opposed to launching from land. One problem that was brought up, and we've talked about it on this channel before, launching from a platform. If we launch the Super Heavy from something like an oil platform, are the vibrations through the water created by such a massive launch going to create a huge, ecological disaster when it comes to the death of sea life in the vicinity? If that were to take place, if there was to be a massive loss of sea life as the result of the first launch of the Super Heavy from a platform, would that shut it down? Because obviously there is a strong world consensus against those sorts of ecological disasters. So, and this really hasn't been discussed at all, or very, very little. And really, I think experiments need to be carried out in simulations to see whether or not launching something with twice the thrust of the Saturn V would create a problem when it came to that sort of thing. FHM Consulting just joined. Thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate it. The Ukraine Space Agency, Ukraine has a space agency. Oh my Lord, that's fantastic. I didn't know that. Please forgive my ignorance. That is really neat. We're looking at Curtin Air Base, which is a Royal Air Force base, and I need to wet down my throat for a moment. Advertisement for Coca-Cola. Okay. So a while back in northwestern Australia, but got caught up in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Very interesting. I had no idea about that. I'm going to have to look that up and maybe do something on the Ukraine Space Agency. It'd be neat to see if they're trying to compete with Roscosmos. An Australian space agency has recently been created, says Cyclonics, but has not achieved much. It's time for them to achieve more. And, what an accomplishment it would be if a SpaceX facility were built in Darwin. Um, in Darwin, we need devastating launch power to help with our crocodile problem. Yes, you guys do have a lot of crocs down there. There is no question. I have no idea how many people are killed in Australia annually by crocodiles, but I do know that you have a lot of crocodiles down there. And of course, the crocodile hunter, God rest his soul, is the most well known of and really advocated for crocodiles, and for their for keeping them alive in spite of any danger that they might represent. And he was not killed by a crocodile, by the way. Ironically, the poor fella, Steve Irwin, was killed by a manta ray. And that was so long ago, it actually seems like only yesterday. But sadly, it happened. It happened quite some time ago. Ukraine has some space infrastructure from the dismantling of the USSR, says Paroxys. Very interesting. I didn't know that. Nice Bryce says, I feel like Darwin would be too populated for super heavy launches. Isn't that why we're in Boca Chica? Offshore seems the only solution to noise, but the sea life issue, yeah, it is a problem, isn't it? Of course, we could, build a facility a little ways away from Darwin. I'm not sure if there is just nothing but swamp in the area, or if there are other less populated areas close to Darwin that wouldn't be quite as problematic. I do know that Titusville, which is where my uncle lived for most of his life, the shuttle launches, you could barely hear them in Titusville, and Titusville was extremely close to Cape Canaveral. Now, obviously, the shuttle is not the super heavy, But still, you don't have to get that far away, and there are a lot of methods for noise suppression. So it might, if they could be just a little ways outside of Darwin, that might be a way to make that a little bit easier. But still, yes, that is a clear issue. Okay, Curtin Air Base has an advantage of government support, indigenous corporations who already provide hot fueling support to the Northwest Shelf LNG. Interesting. I didn't know about those sorts of things. So very interesting indeed. Um, once again, a lot of good ideas here. The crocodiles would win against a starship. I've got a very interesting story. First time you're hearing it, I'm going to put it out on a video eventually about my uncle. But I'll tell a story about my uncle who worked for NASA for decades. There was an alligator that was run over by one of the giant mowers that they had at NASA at Cape Canaveral, and it lost one of its front legs, and it was sitting out on the tarmac. And my uncle decided to try to take a picture of it. And the alligator on three legs took off and chased my uncle across the across the tarmac, and nearly got him. His fellow employees thought that that was one of the funniest things that they had ever seen. I was only about 10 years old when that happened. But nevertheless, interesting story when we're talking about crocodiles. My uncle was nearly a victim of an alligator attack at Cape Canaveral. So speaking of those kinds of reptiles. Okay, interesting. So we have a link that just came up, a new plan to have rockets blast off from Kimberly. Ukrainian officials say that they could achieve a liftoff tomorrow if the right site was found. Thank you so much. And by the way, that's another advantage that is represented, or rather, yeah, another advantage to being on Discord here is we always have a lot of links that get posted here, and then we consolidate the links for everybody so that you can look at everything that we post. But there is something there that was something that was just posted in the West Australian, apparently, in terms of having rockets blast off from the Kimberley. So the Ukrainians are talking about launching from there. How about that? That would be, oh, I apologize for the difference. It wasn't a manta ray, it was a bull ray. Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. Still quite ironic that the crocodile hunter would have been killed by something other than a reptile, given all of the incredibly dangerous reptiles that he liked to mess around with. But he just didn't have the same experience with sea life as he had with reptiles. And quite a tragedy, quite a tragedy. Regardless, rays kill very few people, especially the ones that are not poisonous. So very sad indeed that took place. And he was a guy I really loved watching when I was younger. Quite a charismatic and funny guy. There's a significant amount of sparsely populated land around and above Darwin, close enough for resources, says Cyclonic. So there you go. Once again, Darwin, a good possibility rather. The Northern Territory has the lowest population. I don't know about the city out of Australian states. Yeah, once again, it seems to me that there would be some areas around Darwin that would be fine. And once again, Titusville is really, really close to Cape Canaveral, and you had to be a lot closer to the Cape in order to really hear much of anything when it was launches. Even the Saturn V's, both my aunt and my uncle, both of whom are gone now. They both said that you pretty well, you could hear the Saturn V's launching from their house, but it wasn't like, a window rattling experience from there. But again, we're talking something with twice the launch power of the Saturn V. So who knows? Who knows what that's going to be like? I hope to see it in person first time, and I'll be one of like a billion people who shows up. But in any event, okay. Yeah, raptors went extinct, but crocodiles survived. Yes, that's true. Crocodiles are incredibly good survivors. Shoal Bay looks like a good candidate. The peninsula, anyway. Okay, Shoal Bay. Not even familiar with it. I don't even know how far away that is from Darwin. Uh, FHM Consulting says Western Australia also an advantage in that the hydrogen industry is being developed. Uh, Washington has a large shipbuilding industry and expertise in remote operations in the mining sector. Okay, so once again, Australia continues to be a good candidate. So I'm thinking, okay, why are we messing around? Now I'm starting to get pissed. Why are we messing around with this? Why are we not aggressively pursuing this? Australia seems to be loaded with the type of talent, with the type of resources, with everything that a spaceport would need. And Northern Australia is very close to the equator. It all makes sense. So why are we not doing this? I mean, there are companies building spaceports in Scotland, for God's sake. So why aren't we doing this in Australia? It seems to be just a no-brainer. Other agencies partnered with Australia for space projects rather than the same old NASA, such as Russia, India, Japan, United Arab Emirates. Yeah, the UAE has already demonstrated that they don't mind launching things from elsewhere because they launched their Hope mission from Japan, not from the United Arab Emirates. Thank you. A map was just provided to me for of Australia for reference for a lot of these things that are being talked about. These are easy to look up, obviously, but nevertheless, thank you for providing that. Okay, Tyra Anasazi, thank you, Cyclonics, by the way. He's the one who just provided that link. Tyre Anasazi, the Northern Territory, sparsely populated, and there's a number of areas where you could build a huge spaceport and nobody would notice. Excuse me. Once again, I say, why not? Why not indeed? Because Boca Chica is very sparsely populated, isn't it? And yet we're doing that. So why not? Why not Australia? Once again, closer to the equator. It just makes more sense. The less fuel you use, and fuel consumption is going to be a huge difference. The more fuel the Starship has post, low Earth orbiting refueling, the more fuel it's going to have left by the time it arrives at Mars and makes its suicide dive, as I call, into the atmosphere. The more fuel that's left, the more likely that it's going to be able to execute that last maneuver smoothly. So fuel makes a huge difference here. So again, it just makes all kinds of sense. Um, okay, Paroxys, our country has bureaucracy too. I'm not sure politicians think about the future. Yes, that's actually true. I heard that after Elon Musk built a large solar facility in Australia, that there were politicians that pitched a fit about it or something like that, even though he did it because of massive energy costs in Australia. What the hell was with that? I don't quite get that as to why anybody in Australia would have been annoyed over Elon Musk building a massive power facility in Australia. That makes no sense at all. Okay, space industries in Perth, Washington will be launching a mission to mine hydrogen-3 on the moon next year using Ariane. And by the way, that is the company that I was leaving nameless when we're talking about. I'm going to be doing something on them associated with the ESA at some point. Building a test rover, Ariane, or however it's pronounced. Once again, I should know a little bit more about that, but I don't. Is a company that might have a problem collaborating with SpaceX because they are such strong competitors. The only reason they're surviving right now, actually, is because the European government or the European Union supports them with subsidies. Because launching is more expensive with their rockets than with SpaceX. So in any event, that's a company that would probably be hesitant to collaborate. I wouldn't be surprised if Australia could take a lead in space mining or something. The outback looks like Mars already. Yep, good point. Tom, thanks for showing up. Australia, he thinks Australia is great for a spaceport and even Starship construction. Once again, okay. So FHM Consulting just pointed out the coal lobby is, and that's not very. Yeah, I'm talking about the Hornsdale Power Reserve, a huge battery that was built in South Australia that received a lot of criticism, says Cyclonics. Yes. And was it the coal lobby? Was that it? It sounds like it. Paroxys just pointed out again, side effect from having a large mining industry. Well, the coal lobby doesn't seem to be doing much in helping the Australian people from affording their power costs. I've heard that the power bills for lots of people in Australia are ridiculous, are almost impossible to afford, and that's sad. That's really sad. And so, as I understand it, Elon was trying to do something about that. So in any event, most people live in the biggest cities and have no vision for the future. Okay. So Tyron Asazi, I've heard you talk about this fuel topic often, but isn't SpaceX preparing to make multiple launches routine? Wouldn't it be easy for them to launch 6 or 10 or however many missions to completely refuel a Starship in orbit before escape? We don't know how easy it's going to be. We really don't. It's a complete unknown. The one thing that I do know is that Falcon 9s scrub their launches all the time as a result of one thing or another. So 10, 12 launches, how long is it going to take to completely refuel a Starship? Yes, that's the plan. That is indeed the plan. But thus far, SpaceX has not demonstrated an ability to launch again and again and again and again in rapid succession. Just within a day or two of each other, they haven't even come close to doing that. So the plan, of course, is for quick turnaround, 3 launches a day. Okay, show me. Show me how that's possible. Now, maybe it is. Maybe it is. But thus far, SpaceX has not been able to take one of their reused boosters from a Falcon 9, turn it around, and launch it again in short order in just a few days. They just haven't been able to do that. So, it's now, maybe they have a plan on somehow doing this a lot faster, but thus far, they have not been able to do that. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not this is going to be as easy as it is being pitched. With the frequency of launches suggested, local weather conditions would be a critical consideration. How is Darwin? My understanding is Darwin does get a fair amount of precipitation compared to the rest of Australia, but I don't know. Uh, but in any event, yeah, that's all going to be an issue. we should be the leaders in solar and wind in the world, but politics, yes, Australia should be the leaders in that, especially solar. My God, the amount of solar energy that could be generated in Australia. Yeah, it's sad. It's sad that it's not happening. Sounds like you guys have a lot of the same problems that the United States has. There are, Paroxys points out, there are huge issues with power in Australia, but people taking it into their own hands. Huge amounts of Australians have solar panels on their houses. I'm thrilled to hear it. I am thrilled to hear about that because very few people here do it where I live in South Carolina. As a matter of fact, I worked for a nonprofit and I saw to it that both of our major facilities got solar panels put onto the facilities. One with a grant and one with some assistance from a local solar company. So in any event, but that's an exception rather than the rule. But in any event, it did make a difference. So yeah, I'm glad to see that folks are doing that. Again, Barack says there are big issues with power in Australia. Okay, well, I already read that one. Weather will have to be disregarded entirely for refuel flight unless it's a hurricane or a cyclone. Well, we'll see. So right now, SpaceX is taking weather very seriously. Losing a super heavy as a result of weather is, a serious consideration. Obviously with Apollo 10 and what happened with it, with the lightning strike that hit Apollo 10 when they launched, caused problems that lasted all the way through the mission. And given the fact that that Apollo 10, was a manned mission, and everything that would be going on with a refueling Starship would be entirely automated, a lightning strike might be an issue. I'm not certain if you could provide complete protection from that. If you were launching through some sort of cloud burst. It could be a problem. So in any event, are you sure you want to move to a country where the toilets flush backwards, they drive on the left, and their units are metric, says Going Ballistic. Well, I actually am planning in a few years to move to a country where they drive on the left. And they use some metric units, but that's a ways in the future. But yeah, it's there. Australia is just an awesome place from what I understand. I've never been there, and that is a huge oversight on my part and something I would love to do at some point. Um, Launching from Darwin, where would the super heavy booster be recovered? The assumption always is that it returns pretty close to where it launched from, but once again, I'm not certain about that one. There could be again, it's offshore, that sort of thing. But my understanding is that it would land fairly close to where it launched from and just have a new Starship loaded on board is my understanding. Also concerned, FHM Consulting, concerned about launching from sea. We have a huge floating platform. It cost $15 billion sitting idle in Northwest Australia because of issues with electrical and gas processing. The SpaceX concept would probably have the same issues if they think they can just use an oil platform kind of solution. Very good point, and thank you very much for bringing that up. Yeah, it probably is going to be extremely, challenging. It's not like they can just do this. It's going to be a very expensive investment, billions of dollars, I would assume. And once again, how much does SpaceX have to invest in this before Starlink starts producing huge amounts of money? kind of hard to say, although they did just get another big infusion of cash, very big infusion of cash, which is good news. From Darwin, yeah, $15 billion for that platform in Northwest Australia that isn't even being used yet. Yeah, yeah, that's a lot of money to spend on just a facility. From Darwin, Super Heavy booster would most likely be able to land with no need for ships. Yes, that is my understanding. Is that the Super Heavy booster uses it only provides a boost up to a certain point, and then the Starship's engines take over and pushes it the rest of the way up into low Earth orbit, and then it runs out of gas, and that's why it needs refuel. West Australia is actually known for good weather. Well, okay, thank you, Peroxix. That's good to know. Biggest radar array near Perth. I also think, and of course, Perth is a long ways south. I have a friend from Perth, actually. I also think that Darwin has a large military presence, which I suppose would influence anything like rocket launches. Once again, Darwin is sounding really good. And by the way, Andy L, thank you very much for the comment that you just made. I do appreciate that. It's my pleasure to do these live streams. I really enjoy them. We have a lot, and I enjoy bringing them to you ad free. At least I hope these things are ad free because that's my intention. That's how I set them up. So, in any event, because of you guys, because of your support, I bring them to you without advertisement, and that includes the recorded versions. So I've been doing that for the last few of them. Okay, West Australia, actually known for good weather, etc. Okay, we already got that one. Going ballistic, Australia is part of the Deep Space Network. Yes, that is, I forgot all about that, but yes, the Deep Space Network is what NASA uses in order to communicate. They have very large transmission antennas to communicate with Mars. And Australia, of course, southern hemisphere, other side of the planet, is necessary in order to make sure that we have nonstop communication with anything that we send to Mars or to Jupiter, anywhere out into the solar system. So, in order to communicate deep space, we need transmitting antennas everywhere in order to be able to do that. And Australia is a part of that. Australia's radar array also played an important part in the Apollo program, says Cyclonics. Yes, thank you for that contribution. Yes, Australia has been involved. So once again, I don't get it. Why aren't we doing this? It seems to me that we should be. Australia also has a square kilometer or kilometer, as you folks say, array project in conjunction with South Africa. I did not actually know that. So again, this is all sounding very positive. Sounds like Spaceport Darwin should become a reality or something like it. It's all sounding really, really good to me to have something like that there. Or, once again, we've brought up other good possibilities here too. Mexico, that sort of thing. Why not? We should start considering thinking outside the box. Get away from Cape Canaveral. They're not going to be able to handle this. Now, of course, Boca Chica, seems to be where SpaceX is concentrating a lot of their efforts. But once again, that's not a perfect spot when we're talking about equatorial locations. Why not why not Darwin? On the other hand, the first moon pictures came via the Honeysuckle Creek down, and I did not know that actually. They came in through that through that communications network. So learning new stuff all the time. That's good to know. And one of the reasons why I did one of these at this particular time of day is because I wanted you folks in other parts of the world to participate. And that is a very good thing. So, and we also don't have to worry too much about COVID. I just said the bad word, but you know what? This thing isn't monetized, so I don't give a damn. That is something your country, Australia, and many others actually have done a pretty good job of controlling that disease. But of course, that hopefully is going to be going away or dealt with sometime soon. Dear God, I hope so. One of my dear friends in Colorado just died of COVID, and in any event, it's that's the second person that I know back in Colorado who has died of this disease. So in any event, good to know that there are many other countries that are doing so much better than the United States is. Well, thank you. It's all right. In any event, yeah, he was a very good fellow, and he went out one time, just because he was so tired of being locked inside, and he caught it, and they put him into an induced coma, and a few days later he was dead. So quite a tragedy. He had some underlying medical conditions, so that's why that took place. So in any event, I feel very strongly about this disease and what it's doing to this country, and how many people it's killing, and the disregard that so many people have for the severity of it. It's taken on a personal issue for me, but that's not what we're talking about today. So I'm going to stop talking about it. Even talking about it would get me demonetized, but I don't give a damn because I didn't monetize this video. So it's the way it is. In any event, okay, so we got more people contributing. This has been great. The time has been just blowing by. We have about 24, 25 minutes left, somewhere in that vicinity. Wow, it's amazing how quickly these things go by. So we got two more people contributing, but this has been awesome. And once again, Spaceport Darwin sounds like it should be a reality. I'm not seeing any downsides. I'm really not. Obviously, it would take money. Obviously, it would take infrastructure and effort. But at the same time, when it comes down to it, so would building space launch facilities on oil platforms or whatever Elon has in mind. So why not Darwin? Seems perfectly logical to me. Okay, we have a lot of people typing, a lot of people typing. So, and that's great. Please contribute while I wet my throat down some more. Doesn't Australia have most of the raw materials and industries to produce a starship? Says Tom. As far as I know, yes. I don't think they have any shortage of stainless steel or electronics or anything else that would be required. Seems to me, Australia is a very modern, industrialized country. I don't see any problems with them building starships there. Um, Okay. Yes, Paroxys. This has been a good thing. I definitely want to focus on other countries. I think that once again, as I have said before, and I will say over and over again, the exploration and colonization of the solar system is not an American thing. It's not a Russian thing. It's not a Chinese thing. It's a human thing, and everybody should be involved with it, and everybody should be playing a part. And excluding anyone is just wrong. Now, I understand China to a limited degree, but frankly, we should be trying to encourage them to become part of the fold somehow. If they, if they mess up and if we find out that they're stealing technology and that sort of thing, then okay, exclude them. But, if they don't, that could be the basis for peace between us and them in the future. Who knows? But I do believe that, the exploration of space needs to be a human thing, and everybody needs to be a part of it. Did Australians really try to burn signal fires and help John Glenn with a special spirit vibe music, the didgeridoo? I have no idea. I really have no idea with that. But in any event, we have some more comments about this, so let me get caught up. With Starship Earth to Earth, Darwin would not likely be used commercially. A spaceport on the southeast coast would be utilized a lot more. I agree, Darwin is not a huge city, so the Earth to Earth Starship thing would not make as much sense with Darwin. But at the same time, Earth to Earth Starship is a very different issue, and a little ways in the future here. So I'm thinking Darwin is more us going into orbit and us exploring the solar system than an Earth to Earth kind of thing. Perth resident, says FHM Consulting, all got out with blankets and torches to signal John Glenn. How about that? That's fantastic to know. I did not know that. So the folks of Perth, how about that? And like I say, I've got a friend from Perth, so it's very interesting to know, and I'm gonna have to tell him about that. Okay, it's a short flight. Tyra Anasazi points out there's a short flight from anywhere in Australia to Darwin's airport. From there, a hyperloop to the spaceport, and boom, we are in space. Interesting point. Hyperloop to Darwin. Bam, anybody in Australia can go into space. Very interesting possibility. Broxus says China in the future won't be the same as China today. And the same with every country. Cultures and people aren't set in stone. I totally agree. There can be a change in government, a change in attitude, and everything goes in a different direction. And that's certainly what I hope happens. And that's what we should be trying to encourage collaboration. Even if a country is not being very cooperative, let's try anyway on a limited basis. Let's say, okay, we trust you a little bit. Let's collaborate on this little project and see how it goes, rather than starting to erect a new kind of iron curtain, or the bamboo curtain as it used to be known back in the Mao Zedong days. Okay, FHM Consulting. I think Australia should just aim for a testing point to point to sort out a suicide dive from orbit. That would be an interesting thing, using it for testing that particular type of landing. Excuse me. And by the way, I'm kind of hoping that the suicide dive becomes a common expression. Not necessarily because I think it's suicidal. I think that, physics shows that kind of landing could actually be done. I prefer a powered landing, but still, I think it'd be very funny if that started to become a common use amongst the space community. But in any event, okay, we have somebody else typing, and we still have 18 minutes to go, guys. So feel free to jump in. And once again, I have in the description of all of my live streams, made it very clear as to how to participate in these events. I am thrilled that so many of you are watching and so many of you are part of the audience. Thank you so much for tuning in. But it's super cheap to participate in these things. $3 a month. That's it, and you can become part of the conversation. Suicide dive referring to Falcon 9 landing as well. So no longer so suicidal. No, a powered landing is not suicidal at all, in my opinion. It used to be rocket scientists certainly would have said that a Falcon 9 booster landing would have been suicidal back in the day. But the fact of the matter is that we are routinely landing Falcon 9 boosters without a problem at all. Um, I've always wondered why SpaceX doesn't use any kind of drag inducing devices such as parachutes or inflatable shields to slow down. One of the problems, any kind of drag inducing device on something so heavy will be useless, unless, of course, unless, if any kind of parachute big enough to provide any sort of deceleration, considerable deceleration, like, for example, on the uh, on the Curiosity, was a huge number of G's that was experienced by the Curiosity when its parachutes were deployed on Mars. Enough G's to kill whoever would have been inside if you could have put a human inside the Curiosity. So there are drawbacks to parachutes are practically useless for something as massive as the Starship, especially in a super thin atmosphere, like Mars. And of course, also parachutes, you've got drift issues and stuff like that. Um, anybody who's jumped out of a plane, some of them are very precise in their ability to parachute, but if you don't have somebody super skilled involved with jumping out of a plane, you're going to have people drifting. And any sort of deployment of airborne troops in the past has resulted with troops ending up in trees and breaking their necks, that sort of thing, because of the drift involved with using parachutes. So there's always going to be issues with precision landing when it comes to using parachutes. Could a hyperloop be built under the sea from Papua New Guinea or Indonesia to Darwin, says Tom. Cyclonic says economically, no, hypothetically, yes. I don't know how many miles we're talking about from Port Moresby to Australia. I think it's a substantial amount. I think it's a lot, hundreds of miles, rather than the very short distance between England and France for the Channel, I think is what we're trying to compare this to. It would be extremely expensive and difficult. The Channel was an incredible undertaking in itself. I think trying to build something from Port Moresby to Australia would be super difficult. A little bit off topic. There's a massive solar array being built in Darwin to power Singapore. Wow, really? How are they going to do that? Sub-oceanic cable or something like that, Peroxis? I'm curious about that. That's pretty cool, to that they're doing that, and I am very interested to hear what's going on. Tom Huck brought up the Boring Company as a possibility. Excuse me, to go. I would assume, Tom, from Port Moresby to Australia. Maybe. I really don't know what boring hundreds of miles under the seabed would do. How difficult that would be. I think it would be quite challenging. But, anything's possible. And I don't know how deep the ocean is between Port Moresby and Australia also. I don't know. I know that it's not very deep between Britain and France, which made the channel a lot of an easier task from an engineering standpoint. But I don't know about Port Moresby and Australia. Okay. Okay, to power Indonesia. Once again, I am up There we go. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paraxis. Just threw on a link called Australia to Power Singapore with the world's largest solar farm. I am fascinated by that, and I am going to click on that link as soon as this is over because I am so intrigued about how that's going to be done. I think that that's a wonderful idea. I think that that's going to bring obvious advantage to Singapore and a lot of jobs and a lot of revenue to Australia. And that's what Australia, and once again, I'm not going to tell your country what you should be doing, but the amount of jobs and the amount of money and industry that could be brought to Australia by solar energy, given how much sunlight your country gets all the time. I think that the solar industry should be absolutely exploding. It would be such a huge industry, providing so much money and jobs to Australia. I would love it. I would love it. You can only weigh pipe down with rocks and earth on seabed like gas pipelines. Way too deep for the boring company, says FHM Consulting. So, yeah, once again, I don't know how deep it is between New Guinea and Australia. If it is significantly deep, then that could be a problem. Jobs, yes, Spaceport would provide great opportunities for Indigenous Australians. Yes, indeed. And this would be, of course, any Australian. It's just about anybody would have an opportunity from a spaceport in Darwin. Construction people, just anything that for a large facility, from food preparation to just about anything would be absolutely fantastic. Oh, very cool. Some plans. Hold on for just one moment here. A lot more solar stuff coming on here. From Paroxys. Also plans for Mongolia to power Japan. How about that? Africa to power Europe. How about that? And two more links here provided from the Mongolia plan to provide solar power to the Japanese, and also look at all of those potential solar spots in Africa. That's in northern Africa, huge opportunities. And once again, I would say Morocco would be a great opportunity. Lots of sunlight there and a very stable government, as far as I know, anyway. A very stable government in Morocco. Tunisia, also another big possibility when we're talking about solar power. Tunisia has a fairly stable government and is a popular tourist destination for Europeans. So Egypt, yes, Egypt has gone through a lot of chaos as of late. I don't know where they are now. They had a military coup. I don't know if post Mubarak, since Mubarak was removed from power, as to what's going on in Egypt now. I do know that there has been a fair amount of terrorist activity in Egypt, but I don't know what the current situation is there. But once again, what I do know, even though military coup, iron-handed stability, says Tara Anasazi. Yeah, that's true. It does provide a lot more stability. It is unfortunate that we have to talk about things in that regard because there are plenty of countries in the Middle East that don't require that kind of iron-handed stability. Jordan, I would say, would be another example of that. A constitutional monarchy, certainly not a pure democratic state, but still a pretty stable place. Another friend of mine drove across the border from Israel to Jordan by herself, just wearing a scarf across her face. That was about it. Just being respectful of the local culture, and everybody treated her magnificently in Jordan. So there are plenty of places in the Middle East that are ideal for development when it comes to space. Space. Yes, you're right. You are right. Jordan is super laid back, and that's essentially because of their leadership. The series of monarchs that Jordan has had have all been extremely westernized, have almost exclusively married Westerners, except for the current king, who is married to a very sophisticated Palestinian woman. And still, the country remains very stable, very progressive. It has open trade arrangements with Israel. A very positive thing. Okay, back to spaceport at Darwin. Would fuel production use local energy or be based on, excuse me, LNG for the main resource? I would say use solar power for Darwin. Why not? That's Elon Musk is built into that anyway. So that would be another possibility. But in any event, yeah, I would say that I would say that that would be, and if we're talking about LNG as natural gas, Australia produces the most of it. Once again, and we're using a term, and I hate to express ignorance here. Just wanted to be sure about LNG, what we're talking about here, because we've used it several times. Want to make sure I'm thinking straight here, because I'm feeling like an idiot. But in any event, let's be 100% certain that we're all talking about the same thing here. But once again, I feel that liquid natural gas, thank you. I thought I was talking about the same thing, but I just wanted to be 100% certain. So, liquid natural gas is an excellent source of power, but once again, lots of methane and lots of greenhouse gases. I'm still a big advocate for solar energy, but again, the greenhouse gas thing, that's a really charged subject that I don't want to get into. But Elon believes very much in solar power, a lot of solar power potential in Australia. Just seems to be a no-brainer to me. Why not use that kind of power? Fracking soon starting. That's a whole lot of no fun. Half my family is from North Dakota, and we have seen a lot of farmland utterly destroyed by fracking. So not a good thing at all. Not a good thing at all. And needs to be stopped. I don't care if it produces local oil or not, or how rich it makes people, because I have seen firsthand the destruction that fracking brings to a state in western North Dakota, and it is not a good thing. Not a good thing at all. Yeah, a lot of people made a lot of money off of it. There's no question about it. But the fact of the matter is, it's not worth it for the long term damage that it brings. We need to get away from using fossil fuels. Simple as that. We can use those kinds of things on Titan, and my most recent episode is about that. There's plenty of hydrocarbons to be used on Titan for power if we want to use it there. We don't have to use it here anymore. We've been using it for over a century. Time to move on to a different type of power. Liquid natural gas is for the rockets, says Going Ballistic. Well, once again, rockets, not like they go up constantly. So the pollution represented by that, or just, the fact that methane is going to produce that, greenhouse gases, rockets are not going to be going up continuously, and really is going to contribute in a very small way to any sort of pollution problems. Australia also has a lot of radioactive ore that could be used for power plants. Thank you, Cyclonics. Wasn't completely aware of that. And nuclear power is something that's going to be critical to the future of space exploration. Nuclear thermal being the most obvious. And so if we're going to if we're going to build spaceports in Darwin, why not test nuclear thermal engines there as well? Australia is a close ally of the United States. Why in the world can we not cannot trust the Australians to start testing these sorts of things and use nuclear thermal engines for future exploration of the solar system? Nuclear thermal power is something that we can do right now and shortens the distance or shortens the amount of time that it would take for us to reach Mars by 50%. It is time for us to move away from conventional rockets, conventional chemical rockets, and start moving towards nuclear thermal power. And that's one of many types of alternate energy sources, by the way. Okay, Rinchen Uranium, FHM Consulting. This is the Western Australia Power Proposal. Solar, wind, hydrogen, biggest in the world. And he includes FHM Consulting, includes another link about this massive project that's being done here. So once again, another link for everybody here on Discord. Thank you very much for providing that. Man, I'm learning a lot of new stuff today. That's fantastic. We have more people contributing. And we are actually out of time. Good Lord. But nevertheless, I am going to go for just a few more minutes. For those of you that may have arrived late, always do this for everybody's benefit. So let's just have a few more comments or questions because I don't want to cut anybody off. So in any event, Ricker points out everyday astronaut did a good breakdown of the pros and cons of different fuel types, temperatures and proportions, with liquid oxygen skew advantages to current SpaceX blend. Yeah, I would, there's a lot of advantages to methalox fuel. Tons of advantages. And of course, we can use C-class asteroids to produce it. So yeah, currently, using rockets the way that we do now, methalox makes the biggest amount of sense. Although solid rocket fuel is not necessarily a bad thing because we can make solid rocket fuel out of the perchlorates on Mars. So in any event, we can get rid of perchlorates in Martian soil and make solid rocket fuel at the same time. So there's all kinds of possibilities there. But in any event, we have one more comment coming in. SRBs for the Starship. Solid rocket boosters for the Starship. I'd be interested to see how that could be done from an engineering perspective, because it would provide some of the additional thrust necessary to get the Starship into a higher orbit. That would be something else. Okay, last, please no says going ballistic. So yeah, obviously a difference of opinion there. We're going to have to cut it at this point. So in any event, before we get start getting into a solid rocket booster debate. In any event, we have learned a tremendous amount about using Darwin and other options in making the world part of our space initiative. We definitely have to do this. There's no question. If we want to make the exploration of the solar system a human thing instead of an American thing and a Russian thing, then we absolutely need to start building major spaceports in other countries, and close to the equator makes the most sense. And we should be doing it, and we should be doing it now. And I'm going to stay pissed about this issue until we finally start taking action. So until we start taking action about this issue, I urge all of you to stay angry about space.